According to the FBI, the clearance rate for homicide investigations in the US is just over 50%. Each year, thousands of homicide cases go unsolved and end up in cold case files. In this video, we're going to take a look at 3 unsolved murder cases from around the world that happened at night. On April 4th, 1991, in the small farm town of Clinton, Missouri, a 20-year-old woman named Angela Hammond drove her boyfriend Rob Schaefer to his house and dropped him off after leaving a barbecue they attended together. It was 10 p.m. and the plan was for Rob to go home and watch his younger brother until their mother came home, at which point Rob would go back out to meet Angela later in the night. Cell phones were not widely used in 1991, and so about an hour later, Angela called Rob from a phone booth which was only about 7 blocks away from his house. After a short time into the conversation, Angela sounded concerned as she told Rob that an old green Ford pickup truck had circled the empty block she was on multiple times. Angela's concern turned into worry as the pickup truck circled back around the block once again, and this time it pulled up and parked right next to the phone booth. The man gets out of his truck, walks up to the phone booth, and picks up the phone that was right next to the one Angela was using and puts it to his ear. He didn't say anything or call anyone and just hung up the phone after a few seconds and walked back to his car. As Angela turns her head to see what the man was doing, she told her boyfriend, who was still on the line, that the man pulled out a flashlight from his car and was shining it around as if he was looking for something. This is when the call took a disturbing turn. While Angela was telling her boyfriend what was happening, Rob suddenly hears a loud scream over the phone, and Angela stops responding to him. Rob immediately runs out of his house and into his car and speeds down to where the phone booth is. As he pulls up to the phone booth, he sees the pickup truck drive past him in the opposite direction and hears Angela desperately screaming out for him from inside the vehicle. Rob quickly turns his car around, and as he makes a U-turn to follow the truck, he changes gears too quickly and blows his transmission. His car kept slowing down as he tried flooring the gas pedal until it eventually came to a complete stop. He was stuck watching the truck drive off into the dark as he sat there helplessly watching a trail of dust left behind by the tires. This was the last time Angela Hammond was seen alive, and it's very likely that her life was taken that night. Her remains have never been recovered. 32-year-old Dorothy Jane Scott was a single mother who lived with her aunt and her 4-year-old son and worked as a secretary for a company that owned head shops in Stanton, California. In early 1980, Dorothy began receiving strange calls at work from a man she didn't know. The man would frequently call her and profess his love for her and tell her that he wanted to be with her. That was enough to make Dorothy feel uneasy about going to work, but she became scared when the man's demeanor started to change and he'd tell her that he was going to kill her and cut her up into pieces so that nobody would find her. Her mother recounts, "One day, he called and said to go outside because he had something for her. She went out and there was a single dead red rose on the windshield of her car. Dorothy became frightened and felt threatened to the point where she considered buying a handgun for protection. She even started taking karate classes so she'd know how to defend herself in case she was confronted by this man." At 9 p.m. on May 28, 1980, just a week after Dorothy started her karate class, she was attending a work meeting with her coworkers. During the meeting, she noticed that one of her coworkers, Conrad Bostron, didn't look very well and had a red mark on his arm that looked like an insect bite. He clearly needed medical attention, so Dorothy and another coworker, Pam Head, left the meeting to take Conrad to the emergency room at their local hospital. They soon reached UC Irvine Medical Center, where Conrad was treated for a black widow spider bite. All 3 remained together until Conrad was discharged with a prescription to fill. As they waited for his medication to be ready at the hospital pharmacy, Dorothy went out to the parking lot to bring the car around so that Conrad, who was not in good shape, didn't have to walk too far, while Pam stayed behind with Conrad. Once Pam and Conrad picked up the medication, they walked out through the parking lot exit, where they waited for Dorothy for several minutes. They eventually saw Dorothy's car pulling up, and as they walked to the curb, they noticed that the car was actually speeding up. They waved their hands to get Dorothy to stop, but the car kept speeding and drove right past them and made a sharp turn out of the parking lot. The car's high beams were on, and they could not see who was in the car. Confused about what had just happened, Pam and Conrad waited for a while, but after a few hours of not seeing or hearing from Dorothy, they became worried and reported her missing to the police. A few hours later, at 4:30 in the morning, Dorothy's car, a white 1973 Toyota station wagon, was found burning in an alley about 10 miles from the hospital. The fire was put out, but Dorothy was nowhere to be found. Police meticulously went through the car and searched for clues as to what may have happened or where Dorothy might be, but found nothing. A week after Dorothy went missing, her parents started receiving phone calls from a man who told them that he had Dorothy and that he was going to kill her and would hang up right away. These strange calls would come in every Wednesday afternoon, and after Dorothy's father, Jacob, started picking up the phone calls instead of his wife, the calls eventually stopped coming in. Police and Dorothy's friends and family continued to search for Dorothy and offered a reward for information leading to her, but the trail went cold and there was no sign of Dorothy or the mysterious man who made the calls. 4 years later, on August 6, 1984, at a construction site just 12 miles from the hospital where Dorothy went missing, a construction worker discovered the remains of a dog and a human side by side in a shallow grave. Dental records confirmed the remains to be that of Dorothy Scott. Her wristwatch was still around her wrist, and it had stopped at exactly 12:30 a.m. on May 29, 1980, just an hour after she was last seen by her co-workers. It is believed that this is the time she died, and the killer seems to have thrown the dead dog on top of Dorothy to throw off police dogs in case they were tracking the area for Dorothy's scent. After Dorothy's remains were discovered, her parents started getting the same strange phone calls again. Police tried to trace the calls, but the man never stayed on the phone long enough for them to locate him. The killer has never been found or identified, and the case remains unsolved to this day. In March of 1922, on a small farm in Bavaria, located just 40 miles north of Munich, Germany, strange things started happening to a family of 5 who was living on a farm. 63-year-old Andreas Gruber was the patriarch of the family and lived on his farm with his wife, 72-year-old Kazilla Gruber, their widowed daughter, 35-year-old Victoria Gabriel, Victoria's 2 children, Joseph, age 2, Kazilla, age 7, named after her grandmother, and their maid, 44-year-old Maria. The family had just hired Maria to be their new maid, and she was about to start work and stay with the family on the farm. One day, Andreas finds a strange newspaper from Munich on his property which he did not remember ordering. He thought that the mailman may have delivered it to them by accident, but when he spoke with his neighbors about this, he learned that none of them subscribed to this paper either. Andreas had also told his neighbors about a strange incident in which he discovered fresh footprints in the snow, which led from the wooded forest behind the farm to the machine room in his barn. He followed the footsteps into the machine room, but by the time he went in, there was nobody there. A few months earlier, the previous family maid had quit and left the farm in a hurry, claiming that she constantly heard strange sounds coming from the attic and believed the house to be haunted. Andreas started hearing noises himself in the attic, but when he went to see what it was, he found nothing and the noise would stop after he went to inspect it. The family eventually found a new maid and hired her to help them out on the farm. On March 31st of 1922, Maria moved into the farm as her sister accompanied her and stayed with them for a few hours before she left. The very next day, neighbors in the small close-knit farm town noticed that they hadn't heard from the family for a few days, and they missed the Sunday church service that weekend. 4 days later, in the early morning hours of April 4th, a repairman was scheduled to fix the broken food chopper in the family's farm, but when he arrived, there was nobody there to greet him. After waiting around for about an hour, he made his way to the machine room alone and spent 4 hours fixing it and left. Later that same afternoon, a neighbor sent his 16-year-old and 9-year-old sons to the Hinterkaifeck home to see if they can make contact with the family after not hearing from them for a few days. When the boys got there, they looked around and didn't see anyone, so they returned home. Their father went back to see if he could find them himself, and that's when he made a gruesome discovery. In the barn were the decaying bodies of Andreas, his wife Kazilia, their daughter Victoria, and their granddaughter Kazilia. As he made his way to the family home near the barn, he discovered the bodies of Maria the maid and Victoria's youngest son Joseph. All of the family members were bludgeoned to death with a pickaxe. It's believed that the killer lured each of the family members out to the barn the night that Maria started her job with strange noises and attacked them one by one. And when Maria the maid wouldn't leave the 2-year-old Joseph alone in the house, he made his way to the home and killed them there. After police found a large amount of money on the property, they ruled out robbery as a motive. Multiple people were arrested and interrogated, but the perpetrator has never been caught. The investigation lasted for 64 years until the lead investigator retired in 1986, and to this day, there is no conclusive evidence to prove who committed the gruesome crimes.